Good evening, people. I can see people joining as I'm sitting here this evening. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Obviously, I know it's bang on 8 o'clock, so we're going to give people a minute or so to join. But thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm sure this evening promises to be an amazing night with Eileen, Devine, with our Is This Behavior on Purpose? Navigating the chaos from a brain-based um, first lens, which I think many of you will understand when you're joining us tonight. So let's give ourselves, what is it, 1 minute past 8. We have a huge amount to get through, and I'm sure there'll be an array of questions. So I don't want to wait too long before we just delve into this evening. But I'll just give it another 30 seconds or so because I can see numbers going up, going up, going up. I don't want people to really miss the beginning. But whilst we are waiting for people to join, I just want to say welcome tonight and thank you for joining us. And also, of course, introduce you to our guest this evening, Eileen Devine. Eileen is a parent, coach, consultant, trainer, and a mum to a teenager with neurobehavioral differences. And I think we'll all be so proud to have somebody here this evening who actually has lived experience. So, almost a decade ago, she attended a training on the neurobehavioral model that forever changed the way that her and her husband viewed their daughter and her behaviors, and the information that they were missing then became very clear, and it strengthened their relationship with their daughter. And it's changed the way she's probably lived and navigated her life. She was a clinical social worker long before she was a parent. Um, but she had no concept, as many of us don't, whichever walk of life we come from, what it meant to be a parent to a child who has a brain that works differently, and that what that means to society and what society expects. And I think for me, like I am the person in Adoption UK who goes and seeks our guests for our webinars. And so as an adoptive parent myself in a very small team with many adoptive parents who parent children with FASD, I'm always like very mindful of how would we, our small team, benefit from anybody we bring in to do a webinar. So I think that's my first focus. Would me, Gemma, Lindsay, Sylvia, would we all benefit from this evening? And that's sort of really where my gut comes from. And yeah, I had followed Eileen for quite a while and then reached out for her, and kindly she agreed to be here this evening, and she runs a program called the Brain First Parenting Approach. And her mission has always been, according to her, and I'm sure she'll share more this evening, to help those parents understand the brain first approach to parenting and to implement it into their day-to-day life. And I honestly believe that sits really firmly with um, specifically the FASD Hub's one-to-one parenting program that we offer. So I'm delighted to welcome you this evening, Eileen.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
so
joining
much.
us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking me. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And hello to all of you. It's so nice to be with you, all of the participants here tonight. Thanks for making the time. I understand that your plates are beyond full and it's difficult to carve out this time, so not taking that lightly. Joe gave a little bit of information about my family. I want to just kind of round that picture out a little bit more. These two that you see here are my two kiddos, and they'd probably kill me if they heard me call them kiddos at this point. My son Connell is 18. He's a senior in high school, and he is a biological child. My daughter Maya, that you see there with him, she is 16. There's only 15 months between them in age, And she came to us as a newborn through adoption. The story of how she came into our family is a pretty fantastic one, and she would love for me to spend our entire time telling you about it. We're not going to do that. But what I do want you to know about that story is that she came to us very suddenly and very unexpectedly. That's why they're so close in age. That was not our plan. um, but that was the way that it worked out. And very early on, we could tell because we almost had this side by side comparison with them so close in age that her development wasn't typical. And we're like, okay, that's okay. We went to all the specialists, tried to get all of the early interventions. Me as a social worker, my husband as an educator, were like, wow, we got this. We can figure this out. She got a diagnosis of FASD when she was about 2.5. And I had no idea at the time how lucky we were to have that diagnosis so early and for it to come to us pretty easily. And we thought, great, we know what this is called then. We know what this is about. We'll read all the books and we'll just do it. We'll just give her what she needs and be on our way. So that's not what happened, because all of those books and resources that we were directed to basically told us, a loving, caring environment is important. And these are all the things that are all of the bad outcomes that the way I read it at the time was like she's likely going to encounter when she's about the age she is now, right? A teenager. And that did not sit well with me. I just thought there's got to be more here, right? Like that advice is not helpful. So, long story short, that led me on a quest to figure this out. I was introduced to Diane Malbin and her material. She lives actually where I live in the US on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. Very lucky to have her so close. Attended her training, and that forever changed the way that I saw my daughter. And then also led to me then shifting the focus of my clinical work because I thought, man, this makes so much sense. And the research is so clear. It supports this approach. Why isn't anyone teaching this to parents when a child comes into their care or comes into their family in whatever way that might happen who has a brain that works differently? Like, why isn't that the first thing that happens? Because if you can start parenting your child differently, and we'll talk about what that means, with their neurobiology in mind from a very early age, you can avoid so much suffering, right? So I know I got a list of questions that you all submitted, really appreciate that. And so I know that there is a variety of folks here in terms of professionals and parents. The information we talk about will apply to both of you, no matter what category you're in. Maybe you're like me where it's both. And I also know that there are parents here or caregivers who have kids who are older. And so I don't want what I just said to make it seem as though there's no hope, right? There is always hope. The parents that I work with, some parents have kids with teenagers and it's been like this for a decade. And things can still get better. Relationships can heal. Their child can settle. It doesn't happen overnight. I tell every parent that I work with, this is really deep, complex, transformational work. But there is more hope for you than most people lead you to believe. Okay? So the other piece that I'll mention here about my son and my daughter is my son, Connell, is what society would consider neurotypical. His brain works exactly as society expects it to. For an 18-year-old kid who navigates the world pretty effortlessly, honestly, because his brain works reliably, it works consistently. It's not been impacted on it by anything prenatally or postnatally that would change the architecture of his brain or the makeup of his nervous system. And so it doesn't mean that, there's things that Connell can do that Maya cannot do. But from the outside, it can look like, oh, she's unwilling and he's a good kid and she's not. He's motivated and she's not. She's lazy, whatever it might be, those judgmental statements. None of that is true, right? He has a lot of advantages neurobiologically that she doesn't have. And that makes all the difference in terms of how each of them navigates the world and their experience of the world. So that's the shift in understanding for your unique child. What does it mean for them to have this really unique neurobiology, their brain and their nervous system, and what does that mean for the way they experience the world. So, tonight we're here to talk about behaviors because that's always the most pressing concern for parents and caregivers and professionals for very good reason. Very disruptive, scary, distressing, stressful, overwhelming, all of that kind of stuff. So, of course, that is where our focus begins. But in order to make those behaviors less in intensity and frequency, we have to consider what is happening within somebody's neurobiology, right? Their brain and their nervous system, because that is where all behaviors originate from. And so it only makes sense, right? If we're laser focused on the behavior, how do I make this stop? What do I do when they explode? What do I do when they are refusing to do this? What do I do when fill in the blank? And we typically then, if that's our singular focus and we get tunnel vision, we reach for our power and we try to wield that power in all kinds of ways. Consequences, bribes, threats, getting louder, whatever it might be. And things don't get better. And the behaviors typically continue to escalate in intensity and frequency. Well, why is that? It's because behaviors are always connected to the brain and the nervous system. And if we're not considering the brain and nervous system right alongside our consideration of the behaviors, giving both equal weight, then we're missing 50% of the equation. Okay, so no wonder things don't get better. We only have at most half the story. So that's what we're going to do tonight is try to fill in some of that other half of the story. I want to be realistic about the time we have. My goal for tonight is to give you enough to hopefully make you see this other lens that is open and possible to you, to get you curious about it, to give you hope, right? So that you can then learn more, right? Maybe it's a starting off point for some of you in terms of understanding this. So behavioral lens versus brain first lens, I want to make sure, because you'll hear me talk about the behavioral lens, that we understand the difference between those two. The behavioral lens is what most of us know very, very well, because our society is deeply entrenched in a behavioral lens. And it tells us that all behavior is willful and intentional. It is being done on purpose to us. It's very personal, right? It is a behavioral lens values compliance and control. That is its highest priority, to control another's behavior, to get compliance over them, right? Or get compliance from them. And it assumes that everyone has typically functioning brains, right? That, oh, they should be able to remember that I told them that. Are you kidding me? They can't remember that. It just happened an hour ago. That's assuming that their brain works typically, that it can hold on to information an hour later, right? It uses rewards and punishment and control techniques to change behavior, and relationship is secondary. Because if compliance and control is the highest priority, there isn't room for relationship there as a highest priority. It's secondary, okay? So it doesn't mean that people who come from a behavioral lens are bad or mean or evil people, right? I for sure saw behavior through a behavioral lens prior to my daughter coming into my life and needing to figure out another lens. And it didn't make me a bad person. I wasn't mean. I wasn't a bad mom, right? It just didn't work for her because of all these other pieces that are required for that lens to be compatible. Okay, so brain first lens is rooted in neuroscience research about what we know about the nervous system, what we know about the brain, and when it's been impacted, what does that mean for somebody's navigation of the world? All behavior makes sense. It doesn't mean we like it, but it makes sense. It's like, oh, that's why this is happening. Like, wow, that's a pretty adaptive behavior. Like it's getting a need met, not in the way we want it, maybe, right? But it makes sense to me now. It acknowledges changes to the architecture of the brain and the nervous system. Behaviors are seen as symptoms of overwhelm, symptoms of distress. They are defensive behaviors. It's your child defending against a world that is too much and does not understand them. Relationship is the highest priority. And so we really root ourselves in that. And that leads the way in terms of what do we do next in this very not okay, challenging, scary, whatever it might be situation. And then behaviors are something for us to be curious about. Okay, so this approach really relies on each parent, each caregiver, each teacher, professional understanding how does this child in front of me, how does their brain and nervous system work in comparison to, for example, another child of the same age, similar background, similar history, maybe same diagnosis. There's going to be differences, and those differences matter. And this is often why those kind of lists of strategies that you get based on a diagnosis, for example, or usually based on a behavior, maybe they work a little bit and then they don't, or they work for a little bit, or they don't work at all, or they make the situation worse. Nobody's taking into consideration, well, how does this line up with what I know to be true about this child and their brain and their nervous system? We also root ourselves in the research. This is not just my opinion. This is how disability law frames brain-based differences. It's about how the medical profession, medical publications view brain-based and nervous system-based disabilities, that it is a disability because it's part of our brain and our part of our body has been changed. So I first had my entryway into this foundational science and research with Diane Malbin and her work. She created Facets. She has since retired, but Facets is still very much an organization that supports families of kids with FASD. And this foundational understanding tells us that if someone's living with a brain or a nervous system that works differently, and behaviors are those symptoms, then what do we do for them? We provide them with accommodations. So these core concepts that challenging behaviors reflect underlying brain differences, and therefore the brain differences require accommodations to have those challenging behaviors calm down. It is a widely established truth in neuroscience, in developmental medicine, and disability law. And the reason why I make a point of saying that is because there are points when I'm working with a parent and they're shifting their lens, they're doing this incredibly hard work to shift their lens and see that behavior for what it is, like, they're not doing it to me on purpose. This is about their very fragile nervous system or something in their environment demanding something of them that their brain just can't handle. There's a point for all of us where we meet internal resistance, right? Like, I don't know, this behavior, no, 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 no. This is manipulative. This is willful. This is being done to me just to make my life miserable, right? And so we go back to the science and we root ourselves again in these core concepts that are supported, widely established truths, right? Brain and behavior, or I'm sorry, brain and the nervous system are the source of all behaviors. The other piece that we know based in research is that when a brain and a nervous system is impacted, behaviors reflect those differences. So there's tens of thousands of reasons why this could be the case. We're here tonight talking about FASD, but in working with countless parents at this point, I know that some parents aren't quite sure. It's like suspected FASD, maybe. They're not quite sure. Maybe there's FASD, but there's also trauma. Like, how do I make sense of that? I work with a lot of parents who have kids with complex medical profiles, like neuroimmune conditions, seizure disorders, and behaviors are always the symptoms. Every single one of those diagnoses, autism, ADHD, FASD, trauma, seizure disorders, PANS, PANDAS, whatever it might be. And the reason I say that is because I know that for many, many, many of the parents that I've worked with, there's been lots of confusion. What do we call this? And that's important for some reasons. Like, that's important information to go after. But in your one-to-one relationship with your child, it actually doesn't matter as much. And the reason for that is because what you need to know is, okay, I don't know maybe the origin source, but I know that their brain has been impacted somehow for some reason. I know their nervous system is very fragile. What does that mean for my child? And what does that mean for how I support them in every moment of every day, right? So I say that so that if you feel kind of in this swirl of confusion about what is it called. Again, there's reasons why it's important to continue that search and to get clarity on that. But when you are thinking about how do I parent my unique child, just allowing yourself to quiet that noise a bit so you can focus on who are they as an individual, right? Instead of as a diagnosis. So when we think about the brain and the nervous system, so the two are connected, right? They're really one and the same in many ways. It's from a science standpoint nearly impossible to separate them. But when I'm talking with parents and teaching them, we always do. And the reason for that is because there are very specific things related to the brain and ways that we use that information about our child, and then very specific information about what our nervous system does for us and how do we use that information about our child. So I'm going to speak to both briefly so that you can get a sense of what I mean by this. Okay, so when we think about the brain and we're thinking about, okay, does this environment recognize the ways in which my child's brain works differently? Sometimes parents have a little bit of information like, oh yeah, I know that they don't do well in loud environments and they cover their ears, and so I just intuitively I bring headphones along. That's exactly what we're talking about. But what I have found is that it usually, that understanding needs a lot of deepening. There's just layers and layers and layers there that you just don't know about unless someone teaches you about, right? So here are some assumptions that parents and professionals make and what we know to be true about kids who are neurodiverse, their characteristics. We expect at a certain age that kids will manage frustrations appropriately, especially small frustrations, like no big deal, right? We know that kids with neurobehavioral conditions like FASD, absolutely, they become easily upset by minor frustrations and they are unable to be reasonable when they're upset. They're unable to be logical, right? What do we do from a traditional parenting lens when our kids are upset, especially if we find it unreasonable? Oh, come on, it's not that big of a deal. Sit down, we're going to talk about it. Hey, don't talk to me that way. You need to sit here while we talk about that. You can't go anywhere until we do that. If they are unable to manage their emotional regulation, this is an emotional regulation skill, and we're asking them to talk, reflect, connect the dots, be reasonable, be logical in that moment, waste of our energy, right? That's the path to burnout that I see so many parents on. So that is another reason why it's really, really, really important for us to understand, what am I expecting of this child, usually based on their chronological age, and is that true? Because if it's not true, if they don't have the skill, then we're going to constantly be bumping up against that lagging skill and we will end up in burnout because of it. Okay, so we expect at a certain age that kids can share, they can compromise, they can think of others, they can put other people's needs and preferences above their own, right? We know that kids with brain differences have difficulty with perspective taking. They can't even imagine that somebody else has a different perspective than their own. They have difficulty with being flexible, going with the flow, letting go of what they imagined things were going to be, the way they think it should go, right? It's not about being selfish, and it's not about, not caring about anyone else. It's about not having the cognitive flexibility skills that we assumed they have. Being able to predict and plan ahead. So A plus B equals this pretty awful C. So like, let's not do A plus B. I have parents all the time, they're like, and then they did this. And I was like, what were you thinking? Like, that's, how could you not see that that was going to not end up well for you? It's like, well, let's talk about what you know to be true about how their brain works, right? Can they see what's coming next? Can they connect the dots? And they're like, oh, no, they can't, right? We expect that skill growth is linear and that maturity is predictable and linear. This again is based on, honestly, an ableist framework that looks at chronological age as the marker of that. We know that kids with FASD have on and off days. They are capable of growing and maturing in their skills, absolutely. But it is on a different timeline than most parents ever expect, right? And on those off days where their performance or their skill level, or however you want to categorize it, is not where it is on an on day, how do we see that? Do we just ease into the acceptance? Do we lean into what we know to be true about their brain? Like, yeah, they're going to have off days. Or do we fight against it and say, you did it yesterday. You expected me to believe you can't do it today. You're just trying to get away with something, right? How would it feel to assume that it's an off day and follow that path? Right? That's the internal resistance that I'm talking about. I promise you'll end up in a better place. We expect that kids can manage hunger and thirst at a different age. We know that because of the nervous system and how it works differently, and maybe the internal bodily cues that get missed based on the fragility of that nervous system, like I'm hot, oh, I better take off some layers. I'm cold, I better get a blanket. I'm thirsty, okay, I'm going to get a drink. I'm hungry, oh, I need to go eat so I don't get hangry, right? That's the behavioral symptom. I need to use the restroom, and I can take care of that because I'm tuned into my internal cues. My body sends a red flag and says, ah, you need to relieve yourself, go use the restroom, and I go and take care of that. What if you have a child who's 12, 13, 14, that those internal cues aren't happening, that connection isn't what you expected it would be? Then how do you provide support and accommodations around all of those things that I mentioned? Here we're talking about hunger and thirst. We also know that these kids get brain fatigue. I talk about it as an empty fuel tank. They start the beginning of the day with an empty fuel tank. They're asked to do all of these things. The world expects all of these skills of them that they don't have in place yet. And so they're on empty really quickly. How do we prevent against that cognitive fatigue? Improve their stamina with food and water, right? I know the sensory pieces can sometimes get in the way of that. Um, but yeah, how can we get food, more nutrition, more hydration in them? And then the ability to inhibit impulses. We know that kids around the age of 5 usually start to inhibit their impulses. So they think of a mean thought or a mean thing they want to say out of anger, and they can hold it in because they can understand in that moment that's going to impact those around them. Or they want the toy their friend has and they wait patiently, or they ask. They don't just grab it. They don't use their physical force in some way to get it, right? Um, they want their needs met, but they can wait. They have the ability to wait to have that need met. We know that kids with FASD, other brain-based conditions, are highly, highly impulsive. They cannot think before they act. They cannot, um, they cannot imagine how their actions and their words are going to impact others before it's happened or before it's out of their mouth. There is no thought there. I just had this experience this morning. My daughter, her window of tolerance, her ability to, we call it growing your bravery muscles. It's really being challenged this week as she enters back into a basketball season, which she's done before and she loves, but she forgets. So we're giving her lots of co-regulated support, helping her manage this transition into a new basketball season in today's basketball practice. And this morning, when I got her breakfast, she said, get me a spoon. I said, ooh, wow, I'd be happy to get you a spoon. I'm not sure I like the way that you talked about it. Now, her window of tolerance, her ability to manage that feedback in the moment has grown tremendously over time. I know that some of your kids don't have that capacity. And so there's another, you got to circle back later. You don't address it in the moment, you circle back later to talk to them about it. But the other piece about highly impulsive, she asked me nicely, and then when I was walking towards her, she goes, hurry up, Mom, we don't have all day. And I said, oh, wow. I don't know if I like the way you said that either. These are all just impulsive thoughts driven by her anxiety and her worry, right? So I was able, before she left, to say, I understand that you're having a hard morning and that you're anxious. And she said, I didn't mean what I said. I'm sorry what I said. That circling back piece has taken years and years and years of repeated practice, that repair outside of the moment, when she has her thinking brain online and she's able to take it in and have that conversation. There was a point where I wasn't sure that was going to be the case, right? But many, many years of repetition. So we could talk for the next hour about these assumptions and these comparisons. Okay, I'm going to give you, in the interest of time, a list of the different cognitive skills domains that are at play for all of us. These all contain skills that our brain needs to do well in order for us to navigate the day. So they're patterns of cognitive, emotional, sensory, and social functioning that influence everyday behavior. Okay? We don't have time to go through all of these, but the reason why I want to just even give you kind of a high level awareness of them is to, again, hopefully get you curious to learn more, because all of these matter, right? Every single one of these is important for us as parents to have insight into and deepen our understanding of. Okay? I'm going to go to the nervous system now, and I might come back to the brain if we have more time to fill in a little bit more of that understanding. But I want to jump to the nervous system so you have an understanding of that piece too. Okay? So we talk about the brain, cognitive skills that we assume our child has in place based on their chronological age, usually. We then figure out, do they though? Many of these kids lag way behind in skills that we assumed they had. When that is the case, we want to then proactively put in accommodations based on that information. Like, now I see they can't do that. So I'm going to proactively scaffold support and meet their brain where it is, right? So they're not experiencing distress, overwhelm every single moment of the day. Okay. The other piece is recognizing the fragility of their nervous system. Okay. So some of the questions I know were about, how do I handle my child's aggression or their anger or those outbursts? So I've already talked about one piece. We see the anger, the escalation, the outbursts when there is chronic frustration. They're being asked to meet expectations, meet demands that they just can't meet. And so that would happen to any of us. We would become chronically frustrated and we would behave in ways that reflected that chronic frustration. The other piece, though, is what's happening with the nervous system. Okay? And the nervous system is what I encourage parents to think about in the midst of the challenging moment. So outside the moment, developing the accommodations based on what you know about their lagging skills. Inside the moment, attend to their nervous system. So what do I mean by that? The nervous system, the way I think it's Dan Siegel who describes it this way, the brain's accelerator and brake. Okay, so the nervous system is what keeps us in balance. Our blood pressure, our heart rate, our digestion, our internal body temperature, and also our emotions. Are we regulated or are we dysregulated, or where are we? It's usually somewhere in between. Stress, life stressors, is an accelerator. It impacts our brain function and our nervous system. It revs things up, right? So stress in and of itself is not bad. It can motivate us. It can cause us to act. It can cause us to move. When stress becomes problematic is when it's chronic, right? And that results in fragility. So I will say here, as we're talking about this, we're talking about kids who have fragile nervous systems based on their prenatal exposure to alcohol. There's other reasons why their nervous system can be fragile, but that's what we're talking about tonight. Many, many, many of the parents I work with are also very fragile in their nervous system because they have been under chronic, prolonged, sometimes unpredictable stress. Okay, so as we're talking about the nervous system, if you can manage to think about your child, but also think about how does this resonate with what you know about yourself, or if you're in a partnership, what you know about your partner. Okay, so stress comes our way in life, that's going to happen, and our nervous system helps us rise and fall. We have the stress, the accelerator, but we have this brake in our nervous system, and it just kind of flows really nicely in ideal situations, right? Um, Typical nervous systems, you have that nice dance and that nice balance. You get revved up, you get stressed out, you get overwhelmed, and you have a break, you have coping skills, you have whatever it is that can help you kind of come back into balance again, right? Fragile nervous systems have an over exaggerated or an overactive accelerator. So stress, even small stressors are like wham, right? This accelerator that is just like, on all the time, full throttle. And a brake that's like not working very well at all. So that means this accelerator has all the power. That means this person is on the edge or in dysregulation, whatever that looks like, much of the time. We see behaviors that reflect that fragility, right? So the reason why I talk about inside of the challenging moment, when behaviors are escalated, so let's say aggression, for example, like what do I do? Safety's first, and if you don't have a safety plan and your child's behavioral symptoms are scary, unpredictable, unsafe, that would be my first recommendation. The next piece is to know what's possible and what your greatest parenting tool is, which is not more words. It's not getting bigger and louder. It's not forcing, right? Because you will just end up in a worse place. You will just end up with more escalation. So, I'm going to pause there because I'm getting into what to do. And I want to say one more thing about the nervous systems. So, what are the behavioral symptoms, the defensive behaviors that reflect an overactive accelerator with no brake, right? So, this comes from Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, written by my dear friend Robin Goebel. Excellent book if you haven't checked it out. And you can see this in the research literature. She just lists it out so clearly that individuals who are in a fight or flight state, their nervous system is beyond capacity. They are out of their window of tolerance. These are some of the characteristics that you see, okay? And the other side of dysregulation that can often get missed is this collapsed state, right? This turning more inward. And these are some of the behaviors that reflect that more collapsed state. Okay, so again, seeing these behaviors for what they are. So I mentioned my daughter Maya and that she's 16. And I'll say before I even tell the story, I always check with Maya. Um, I check in with her to make sure it's still okay with her that I share stories about what has happened between us over the years. And she's always curious about who I'm talking to. We got out a map so we could see where you all were today, that kind of thing. And sometimes when I'm like, I think I might tell them about when you used to do this or that, she's like, that was crazy, Mom. And I was like, well, it's kind of tricky. But for her to reflect back now and be like, whoa, I can't even believe that I did some of those things, right? It just shows. I mention that because I want you to know, especially if you have littles, that the kind of growth that is possible, okay? Maya is nowhere near where you would expect a 16-year-old to be in terms of her skills, her understanding of the world, her level of independence, and also she has still matured and grown tremendously, right? In ways that I'm really proud of her for. Okay, so hissing and growling, when she was younger, that was a huge behavior that for a long time I had to work really hard on my reactivity to it. It mostly came up in the morning when she was anticipating going to school, an environment that at times did not bring expectations in alignment with her neurobiology. So, very stressful um, at times. So, she's gearing up, anticipating spending the day in this environment that is just a lot for her. She, of course, couldn't articulate that or talk about that. The way that it came out, the way that that stressor, that accelerator showed itself, the way her fragility reflected back to me was I would say, okay, let's go brush your teeth. And she would hiss or she would growl at me, right? So I had to work really hard to see that for what it is. It wasn't being done to me. It was this automatic, unconscious reaction to her um, fight or flight response, right? Her body feeling under threat. So shifting that and being able to understand what my triggers are, and then what do I do in that moment instead of saying, don't do that. That is so disrespectful. You cannot hiss and growl at me. That is not okay. I don't do that to you. Whatever it might be, right? I see it for what it is. This is her fragile nervous system showing itself fully to me. How do I soothe her nervous system? Nervous systems are never soothed with more talking. They're never soothed with reasoning or logic. They're never soothed with lecturing. They're never soothed with excessive force. They are soothed with using our regulated presence to be the brake. So making sure we have a really strong, healthy brake, and that we can lend that brake to their nervous system when their brake isn't working, right? So that they have the best chance possible of regaining nervous system stability, coming back into their window of tolerance, into regulation, and going on out into this world that is really so much for them to handle. Okay, so that's, I'm guessing many of you have heard about co-regulation, have some familiarity with that term. That's exactly what we're talking about. And what I spend a lot of time talking with parents about, we always talk about the challenging situation and behaviors, but it is always connected to their regulation and how steady their nervous system is. And in many, many cases, how their nervous system needs to heal because of years and years and years, in some cases, of having chronic, prolonged, unpredictable stress that they've been under. Okay? All right. This is the simple, not so simple equation. But this is what I want you to hold on to in terms of thinking about why is your child so challenging behaviorally, and really, again, trying to shift the focus and get curious and get more information about their brain-based differences and their fragile nervous system, what that means for their world, what that means for their experience, and how can we as the adults who hold the power bring the expectations and the environment more in alignment with who they are, right? That's what they deserve. And it also is the path to less challenging behaviors. Okay. I will leave you with a few of these. What does the brain and the nervous system need right now? When we're talking about accommodations, ways to support the brain and the nervous system, these are just a few that are often universal, right? So I'm not at all suggesting this is going to work for every single one of your kids. We already talked about why that prescriptive kind of general approach doesn't work. But I wanted to leave you with something where you had some idea of what accommodations look like. Because oftentimes parents who are very, very overwhelmed for understandable reasons are like, I cannot do one more thing. And so it's helpful. I think what I want you to know and hear is it's not about you working harder. You're already working hard enough. I know that. I know you're motivated. It's about taking all of that energy and shifting the focus so that you can actually see some hopeful results from that energy expenditure, right? Um, so decreasing the distance, the reason for this is because our nervous systems communicate in close proximity. And so I know that some of your kids may shout at you and tell you to get away. So you have to honor that because you don't want to agitate them and send them into more dysregulation. But is there a way to quiet yourself and be nearby? You do not have to talk. Your regulated presence is what you're using. And will they tolerate you being close by if they know that you're not going to talk? If that pattern changes, right? Because that's often what we do. I'm still guilty of that. Offering food and drink and movement, it's very, very regulating. Not being as concerned about the nutritional value. You just get food and drink into them. Structure, routine, predictability, of course. I've talked a lot about talking less or not at all. Giving more time, lots and lots of more time for pretty much everything. Processing what you said, carrying out that one easy step, moving from one thing to the next, all of that. Focusing on relationship and connection. What would change if you let that lead the way, right? Instead of, I need to get accountability, I need to control their behavior, I need recognition of my authority, I need compliance. Let's have that take a back seat and have relationship lead the way and what happens. And then trying to be as flexible as possible with those on and off days. Okay. I'm going to leave you here with this slide and then we can have some questions. I have a podcast called Brain First Parenting. That's the picture on it, so that's why I concluded that. And it's also on YouTube. If you are interested in checking that out, there's my website. And then this QR code is just a link of free resources, my podcasts, my blog posts, and ways to work with me. But it's also that site there if the QR code isn't working for you for some reason. It's go.eileendevine.com/free resources. Either way, we'll get you the same place. All right, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. I'm ready for any questions. They're still
Oh,
burning.
thank
That
you,
was
Eileen.
amazing.
It's been amazing. The chat's been really active as always with our webinars. It starts off slow and then it builds up. And I think Gemma and I have probably been sat here going, okay, we've got our pre-submitted questions and now we've got our live questions. So we're going to have to navigate between those because we don't
Yeah.
have a lot of time left. But
Mhm.
I think it's been hugely impactful and beneficial
Oh,
to
I'm so
our
glad.
community. So I'm gonna kick off. I think what have we got? I think I've probably got 5 minutes, and then I need to hand over to Gemma because we sort of split the topics um, to try and filter through the questions we'd had pre-submitted, and then watch a webinar and go, okay, that's covered, that's covered, that's covered. So,
Yeah.
you know, for everybody here this evening, thank you so much for joining us. And we do really appreciate it, and we take on board everything that we get submitted from all of our webinars. But obviously, our time is limited, so we do our very best to get everything that we can get out of having an amazing guest here this evening. So I'm just going to start with a question about um, if a family come forward of a child who was opioid exposed, how would you say that that may cross over in terms of their lifelong symptoms if they've got no confirmed alcohol exposure and only drug
Yeah.
exposure?
Yeah, lots and lots of similarities. That brain is the organizing principle, neurobiology as the organizing principle absolutely applies to those kiddos, teens, and young adults as well. If you're not familiar with anyone who has their kiddo has that history, Generation O is a great resource that's doing a lot of advocacy around kids exposed in that way specifically. So, but everything that we talked about tonight absolutely applies.
Um, how can somebody deal with long-term aggressive behavior within a family that's impacting all of the family and
Yes.
everybody's exhausted when
Yeah.
they've got a very young child, say 6 or 7?
Yeah. And the 6 or 7 year old is the one who is the aggressor, who's having the
Yeah,
behavioral symptoms. Yeah.
yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge the how hard that is and the level of desperation and hopelessness that parents find themselves in when that is the behavioral symptom that is most present and maybe chronic. It is very difficult sometimes to get curious about a behavior that we find threatening. With that being said, so sometimes it takes support, right? With that being said, everything that we had talked about tonight applies to that behavior. That is a defensive behavior. That child communicating, this is not working for me. This world is too much. I am not fully understood. I need more. I am desperate. I am under distress. Now, I say that with no judgment towards the parent at all. There is no shame and blame. Well, I'm not going to blame anybody, but systems don't give us the information we need to be able to see that pattern for what it is. And so we do whatever we can, right, in that moment of distress. So I want to make sure that's clear. There's no shame and blame there at all. When you can start peeling back the layers of what do we know to be true about that child, what assumptions have we made about them that aren't true, their nervous system is so fragile. How do I support their nervous system in ways that I just hadn't thought about before? That intensity and frequency of the aggression will dissipate over time. And I say over time because, again, as I said in the beginning, you didn't get here overnight. If somebody tells you it's going to change overnight, I would run, right? It's just not realistic. But so many parents that I work with have been trying to go at it through this behavioral lens, trying to get more and more and more control over for understandable reasons, and things have just gotten worse. Right? And I want you to know it's not about you. It's about that child's neurobiology. More information needs to be learned about it. I know that that's a very unsatisfying answer for the parent who submitted it because you want specific answers. Um, Maybe that's a different webinar another day
Yeah.
about that specific thing. But that, again, hopefully this gives you at least a different framework to be curious about and go learn more about.
Yeah, and I think we're always curious, aren't we? As parents, we're always like wanting another thing. So the
Can
impact,
I, sorry, can I do a little follow up to that? Just
Mhm.
because so much of what you were talking about is, relationship and
Yep.
that co-regulation side of things. If we're thinking
Yeah.
about that just in the context of maybe it's child to parent violence and aggression, what would co-regulation look like?
Yes.
That was one of the sort of recurring themes about violence and aggression was
Yes.
yes, wanting strategies, but in terms of co-regulation, what would that what does that look like?
Yes, yes. So, and the fragility of the parent's nervous system if it has been child on parent violence, especially for a very long time, right? So,
Yes.
acknowledging that. And it is a very, very hard situation for a solo parent, for example, to do that alone. Being the single
Yeah.
co-regulator in that family, very, very hard. The very short answer to that is co-regulation only happens when a regulated nervous system can support that dysregulated nervous system. And so if the parent is constantly dysregulated, again, for understandable reasons, because
Yeah.
they are human, how does that parent get support from their village, whatever it might be, so that they can heal, so they aren't always in fight or flight, and they can be steady and grounded in the midst of their child's severe and chronic dysregulation. Um, that process is complex, and I know that parents listening are like, oh my god, like where do I even begin? um, I want to recommend Robin Goebel's book again, Big Baffling Behaviors, Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors. That's very nervous system focused, as another resource that you might pursue.
Brilliant. Thank you.
The other,
yes.
can I just say one other quick thing? Regulated, when I'm talking about regulated, it doesn't mean that you're calm and everything's good and the world is a sunshine, happy place. What it means is I recognize that I am so angry and I'm resentful and I can feel that bubbling up and I know what to do to catch it and soothe myself before I do something or say something I'll regret later.
I think
Okay?
that's really interesting because one of the questions that's come in the chat, which was not something we had like listed that was pre-submitted, is somebody saying, I'm interested in how
Mm-hmm.
long-term chronic stress is
Mm-hmm.
potentially affecting parents in similar ways, and how can we break the cycle of our own stress. And I think that's so powerful because as
Yes.
parents, like Gemma and I are both parents of young girls with FASD, and we do our job with passion and love, and we have our community within our team, but nevertheless, we are still parents, and that's like
Mm-hmm.
quite a powerful question, I think. How
Mm-hmm.
how long-term chronic stress is potentially affecting parents.
Yes.
And
It,
how do you break that cycle? Because it's like looking at where the stress comes from, I guess.
yes, yes. So we hear a lot about the impact of trauma on people's neurobiology. Most parents that I work with who have experienced true trauma through their parenting experience don't recognize it as that. A really great book by Dr. Bruce Perry. He created the neurosequential model. It speaks to exactly this, what happens when we're under stress. And he wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You?
Hmm.
That book will answer that question fully. I want to say that because we don't have time to go into it much more than that. But there are ways to build your resilience and heal your nervous system and heal from that trauma that you've
Yeah.
experienced. Community is a huge one. Choose your community wisely, though. You want them to be co-regulators for you and not dysregulators.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
That's it.
You need the people to like help you.
Yeah, right.
What do you think the impact on parents is when we have these sort of webinars and we talk about the parents' capacity to change? Because I'm sure there are lots of parents on here this evening with, not perfect families, very dysregulated children,
Yep,
lots of struggles. So
yep,
we go, oh, okay, you just do this, but let's wind it back a bit to the reality of living in
yes,
a crisis situation. And parents maybe getting the time to just be on now, maybe haven't been on all of it and thinking, oh,
yes,
I really want to do it. So how do parents who are in sort of a crisis situation scope out the capacity to change to become a parent who
yeah,
can support their family?
yep, yep. Um, I want to, what you're talking about is resilience building. And resilience building is what studies our nervous system, and that leads to our ability to co-regulate with our kids who are chronically dysregulated. Okay. My podcast has episodes on what it means to be resilient and what you can do in moments a day to build your resilience. The hardest piece about that for a lot of parents who are chronically dysregulated is like, really, that's going to help me? Like, I'm telling you about this life that I'm living that no one else can imagine, that's incredibly difficult. And you're telling me that these moments a day are going to shift that? Right? So I always say, well, let's just try it. What you've been doing hasn't been working. It's drops in the bucket. It's totally manageable for you to do in moments a day. Let's just try it and see what happens, right? So if anyone experiencing internal resistance to that, I just want to say that it's very, very understandable given if you are living in that situation. But
I
my
think we're all going to be running to listen to your podcast. I
I'm
know I
just
will
gonna
be anyway.
this is why I just work with parents, truly, right? It's I don't work with the kids, I don't work with the family unit because so much of it is about shifting our understanding of our kids, but making that leap from knowing, like, I get the theory, I get the model, okay, I get what you're saying, and how do we make that leap into truly embodying it?
yeah.
It's complex and it's hard work, and most people need support.
I'm just gonna hand over to Gemma for like we have like a minute or two because we had four
No,
topics and we haven't even touched on them, but I've done a couple of my questions and I just want her to give the opportunity to
I
ask.
was just trying to think of a question that could be, and there's so many that could be done
Yeah.
in a minute, and there aren't any really. But we had some pre-submitted questions and then one or two questions in the chat about your thoughts around our children and our teenagers as they grow up and they turn into adults, in terms
Mhm,
of brain development and,
mhm.
long-term kind of nervous system and
Yep,
just, yeah, lots of
yep,
questions around that, what that might
yeah,
look like.
yeah. Yeah, it I think really focuses on or centers my answer centers on our kids mature and grow, just usually not at the pace or the timeline that we expect it to. And part of our work is to um, be realistic about that and ease into the acceptance of that so our kids can just be who they are. And understanding that from, like, for me, I know that for the rest of my life, I will be parenting my daughter more intensely than I ever expected to, from this alternative lens that goes against what society has presented to me.
Yeah.
And coming to a place of peace and acceptance in that has allowed me to delight in her in ways that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise if I was fighting against that because of the grief and the sadness, and this isn't what I thought it would be, all of that that naturally comes up for us. So there's no markers like, oh, at this age you can expect this. That's definitely not possible. It's the growth and the maturity happens on a different timeline. If your child is chronically dysregulated, that growth and maturity is going to be harder because their thinking brain is offline. They can't access what they need to learn. Again, accommodations, nervous system support allows them to be in their thinking brain so they have more capacity to grow and mature. Okay.
That's
Oh,
lovely.
thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks again to everybody for coming. It's been great to be here.
It's we could just do another hour sitting here. We've got so much that we could still talk about, but your presentation was wonderful, and as I say, I think everyone will be running to watch the podcast and go on your website, and we're getting lots of thank yous. Thank you so
Great.
much in the chat, and brilliantly helpful. And we just really appreciate you taking the time to come along and chat to us tonight. So
Yeah,
thank you
no
very much.
problem. Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.
Thank you
Good
so much.
night.